Some moments change everything. You don't see them coming. They slip into your life quietly, like morning fog rolling across a sleepy town. This is the story of one of those moments when a simple phone call turned my perfectly ordinary life upside down. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon with a phone call. My husband, Tom, had just finished cutting our front lawn. The grass clippings stuck to his sneakers, and sweat dripped down his face from the summer heat. I was busy in our cozy kitchen, my hands covered in white flour up to my wrists. I was trying to make my mother's famous chicken pot pie recipe from memory, the same one she used to make every Sunday when I was little. The smell of fresh thyme and melted butter filled the air, making me feel calm and peaceful. It reminded me of being a child again, safe in my mother's kitchen. But then I heard Tom's voice change as he talked on his phone outside. At first, he sounded curious, like someone had told him interesting news. Then his voice became uncertain, like he wasn't sure about something. Finally, he sounded tired, like he had given up arguing about whatever it was. When Tom walked back into our house, he used the bottom of his work shirt to wipe the sweat from his face. His brown hair was messy from the humidity. He looked at me with that boyish smile he always wore when he was about to ask me for something he knew I might not like. "Rachel," he said, saying my name slowly like he used to do when we first started dating 20 years ago. Back then, it made my heart flutter. Now it just made me nervous. "You remember my cousin Jake, right?" he continued, leaning against our kitchen counter. I stopped stirring the pie filling and looked at him. My wooden spoon froze in midair. Jake. Of course I remembered Jake. Jake was like a bright star in Tom's family. Everyone loved him. He was charming and funny, always traveling to exciting places around the world. He had stories that made everyone at family dinners laugh until their sides hurt. We had only met him a few times over the years at family reunions and holiday gatherings, but there was something special about Jake. He had this energy, this spark that drew people to him like a magnet. Even though he was Tom's younger cousin by 10 years, I had noticed how all the women, both young and old, seemed to gather around him at parties. They hung on his every word like he was telling the most fascinating stories in the world. I had to admit, even I found myself listening a little too carefully when he spoke. "What about Jake?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my heart started beating a little faster. Tom shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking uncomfortable. "Well, he needs a place to stay for a few weeks," Tom explained, avoiding my eyes. "He got a new job in the city, and they're moving him here. But his new apartment won't be ready until the first day of next month. He's kind of stuck without anywhere to go." I put my wooden spoon down very gently on the counter, being careful not to make a sound. "What about a hotel?" I asked quietly. Tom gave a small shrug, and I could see the guilt in his brown eyes mixed with a tiny bit of hope. "You know how expensive hotels are for that long," he said. "And he's family, Rachel. He's always been good to us." I thought about it for a moment. Tom was right. Jake was family, and we had a spare bedroom upstairs that we hardly ever used except for storing old boxes and clothes we didn't wear anymore. "Of course," I said with a smile. "He can stay here." Tom's face lit up with relief, and he came over to give me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Thank you," he whispered. "I knew you'd understand." 2 days later, Jake arrived at our front door with a large black suitcase in one hand and a fancy garment bag in the other. That familiar, confident smile spread across his face the moment he saw me. The years had been very kind to Jake. Too kind, if I'm being completely honest. His dark hair was a little longer than I remembered from the last family reunion 3 years ago. It looked messy, but in a way that seemed both careless and perfectly styled at the same time. He had just enough gray stubble on his jaw to make him look distinguished and mature. His voice, when he spoke, was deeper now and carried the kind of calm confidence that comes from someone who has lived an interesting life full of adventures and experiences. "Rachel," he said, giving me a quick hug that lasted just a second longer than it should have between family members. "You haven't aged a single day," he added with a warm smile. I laughed and brushed off his compliment, but something about the way he looked at me made my skin tingle in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was just different, unfamiliar. After being married for 2 decades, I had gotten used to being invisible in a certain way, especially to other men. I had fallen into a comfortable routine, playing my roles as wife, mother, and hostess. But when Jake looked at me, he didn't see any of those roles. He seemed to see me as just Rachel, the person I used to be before I became all those other things. The first few days of Jake's visit were completely normal and peaceful. Jake turned out to be a wonderful house guest. He was clean and organized, always making his bed and keeping his things tidy. He was helpful around the house, offering to carry groceries or fix small things that had been broken for months. He was polite and considerate, always asking if he could help with dinner or if we needed anything from the store. One evening, Jake surprised both Tom and me by offering to cook dinner. He made the most amazing spicy shrimp pasta that had Tom practically licking his plate clean and asking for seconds. We opened a bottle of wine afterward, and I found myself laughing more than I had in many months. Jake told us stories about his travels to Italy and Thailand, and his adventures working in different cities. That night, after Tom went to bed early with a headache from drinking too much wine, Jake and I decided to sit outside on our back porch. I had put up string lights there last fall, and they cast a warm, golden glow over everything. The crickets sang their evening song in the distance, and the air was filled with the sweet smell of honeysuckle flowers and freshly cut grass. It's really beautiful here, Jake said, taking a slow sip from his wine glass. So peaceful and quiet. It's the kind of place where you'd never want to leave once you found it. I looked out at our backyard where Tom had just planted new rose bushes the week before. They were still small, but I could imagine how beautiful they would be when they bloomed. It is beautiful, I agreed softly, but sometimes peaceful can start to feel too quiet, and when it gets too quiet, it can start to feel lonely, even when you're not alone. I don't know why I said that. Maybe it was because of the wine making me speak more freely than usual. Maybe it was because of the way Jake was really listening to me, not just hearing my words, but understanding what I meant beneath them. He didn't say anything right away. He just nodded slowly, as if he understood something I hadn't even said out loud. Do you ever feel like there's a version of yourself that you left behind somewhere? He asked quietly, looking up at the stars. I turned to look at him, and his question hit me harder than I expected it to. Every single day, I whispered, surprised by my own honesty. Over the next week, the rhythm and feeling of our house began to change in small ways. I found myself looking forward to our late-night conversations on the porch more than I wanted to admit. They were innocent, of course. We were just talking, just getting to know each other better as family members. But during those quiet evening hours, I felt truly seen and heard in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Jake asked me about my art, something that even Tom rarely brought up anymore. Years ago, before we got married and had children, I used to paint. I had been pretty good at it too, but life got busy, and I slowly stopped making time for it. Would you show me your old paintings? Jake asked one evening. I'd love to see them. I hesitated. My paintings were stored in boxes in our garage, covered in dust and forgotten. They're not very good, I said, feeling embarrassed. I doubt that, Jake replied with a gentle smile. The next day, I found myself digging through the old boxes in the garage, pulling out canvases I hadn't looked at in years. When I showed them to Jake, he studied each painting like it was something precious and sacred. These are incredible, Rachel, he said, holding up a piece I had painted years ago during a particularly difficult winter. The painting showed a snowy field with a single red barn in the distance. Why did you stop painting? He asked. I looked away, feeling sad and a little ashamed. Life, I guess. Kids, work, keeping house. I just forgot about that part of myself. Somewhere along the way, Jake placed the painting down very gently, his voice soft and understanding. Maybe it's time to remember that part of yourself again, he said. Then came the night of the big storm. Tom had gone away for the weekend on a fishing trip with his old high school friends, something he did every few months. Jake and I were alone in the house when the sky suddenly cracked open with loud thunder and rain began hitting our windows. Like something wild and alive, the power went out with a flash, leaving us in complete darkness. We searched through drawers and found old candles, lighting them and placing them around the kitchen and living room. The flickering light made everything look mysterious and different. I remembered we had some old board games in the closet, so I pulled them out. We ended up playing Scrabble by candlelight at the kitchen table while the storm raged outside, shaking the windows and making the old house creak and groan. I haven't done anything like this since I was a kid, Jake said, grinning as he carefully placed letter tiles to spell the word desire on the board. That's a fancy word choice, I teased, trying not to think too hard about why he had chosen That particular word. As the night went on, something in the air between us began to shift and change. The house felt smaller somehow, more intimate. The air felt thicker, charged with electricity. That had nothing to do with the storm outside. I could feel his eyes on me as we played, warm and curious and patient. And I realized, sitting there in the flickering candlelight, that I wasn't afraid of being truly seen by someone anymore. When I finally stood up to blow out the candles and go to bed, I felt his hand brush against mine. It was just a light touch, barely there, but it made me stop and turn to look at him. His expression was hard to read in the dim light, but his eyes held something I hadn't seen directed at me in years. There was admiration there, and longing, and respect for who I was as a person. I should go to bed, I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. He nodded slowly. Good night, Rachel. But as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, I knew that something important had shifted between us. Something I couldn't quite name or understand yet, but something I would need to figure out soon. I didn't sleep well that night at all. The storm had passed, but its echoes seemed to have settled somewhere deep in my chest. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the soft, creaking sounds of our old house, the same sounds I had heard every night for 20 years, but which now seemed different somehow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Jake had looked at me in the candlelight. His gaze had been steady and searching, as if he could see something in me that I had forgotten was there. As if he already knew something about me that I wasn't ready to admit to myself. I wasn't afraid of Jake. That wasn't the problem at all. I was afraid of myself. I was afraid of the feelings that were waking up inside me, feelings I thought had gone to sleep forever. The next morning, the world outside looked fresh and clean, like it had been washed by the storm. The air still smelled damp and earthy. Birds were singing loudly in the trees, celebrating the new day. I walked downstairs in my bathrobe, my hair still messy from tossing and turning all night. Jake was already awake in the kitchen, standing barefoot, with his shirt slightly wrinkled from sleep. He was flipping pancakes at the stove with a calm, easy smile on his face. Good morning, sleepyhead, he said, his voice warm and cheerful. I tried to smile back at him, but something inside me felt off balance, like I was standing on a boat that was gently rocking back and forth. You're up early, I managed to say, and in that simple moment, with the smell of pancakes filling the air and Jake's kind eyes looking at me with such warmth, I knew that my quiet, predictable life was about to become something entirely different. He shrugged. When the mood strikes, figured you could use a break. He poured me a cup of coffee, exactly how I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, without asking. That simple gesture more than anything caught me off guard. Tom had never once gotten it right. Even after 20 years, we ate in relative silence. Second, that feels safe but charged. He told me a story about a project at his new job, how everything was moving faster than expected, how he might be able to move into his place earlier than Planetti should have felt relieved. But instead, I felt something dangerously close to disappointment. That afternoon, I decided to paint for the first time in over a decade. I pulled out my easel from the garage. It was dusty and wobbly, but still standing, as set it up by the sunroom windows where the light was soft and golden. Jake walked in quietly and landed in the doorway, not saying anything at first. I my brush in deep blue and let it collide across the canvas. It was clumsy at first, hesitant, but then the motion returned. Tummy wrist, the rhythm. I wasn't painting anything specific, just movement, emotion Mori. Jake eventually spoke. It suits you. Seeing you like this. I glanced back at him, feeling heat rise tummy cheeks. Like what Olive? The words settled between us, like fog. Thick and inescapable. That evening I tried to keep me distance. I busied myself with laundry, with texts to the kids, with a long phone call to my sister. But when the house quieted again and the sky began to darken, I found myself once more on the back porch. Jake joined me. 2 cups of Komil tea in hand. We talked about regrets, about roads not taken, about how sometimes life pulls you in directions you never expected, and how easy it is to forget what you wanted in first place. I used to dream about living by the sea, I confessed, opening a little art gallery. Nothing fancy, just something that was mine. Jake looked out toward the horizon, his expression vulnerable. Why didn't you? I gave a half smile. Because dreams don't fold laundry or cook dinner. They don't pay bills or raise kids. No, he said softly. but they keep you breathing. I don't remember how the conversation shifted, only that it did suddenly. We weren't talking about dreams anymore. We were talking about loneliness, about touch, about how long I'd had been since either of us had really felt anything that wasn't muted by obligation. I'm not looking for trouble, Jake, I said, my voice tight with emotion. I'm not offering any, he replied, and then he did the thing I didn't expect. He stood up and walked away. No pressurino. Clever remarks. No boundary crossed. Just space. He left me with my thoughts, with aching clarity that something in me had cracked open, and I wasn't sure I wanted to close it back up. The next day Tom came home from his trip. He smelled like beer and fish and told the same tired stories he always told. I listened and knitted, laughed in all the right place, but I wasn't fully there. Not anymore. I watched Jake across the room, how he smiled, how he knew when to speak and when to stay quiet, how his eyes occasionally met mine with something unsaid but respectful. Later that night, as I climbed into bed beside Tom and turned off the lamp, I felt like I was floating in two lives at once. One that I had built over decades, solid and familiar, and another had crept in over the course of days uncertain, steering a live. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew things would never be quite the same. The following week moved like slow water, quiet on the surface, but churning underin. Jake kept his distance, not in a cold way. If anything, it was careful, deliberate. We were both walking an invisible line, and we knew it. We still shared meals, casual conversations, even the occasional smile when our paths crossed in the hallway. But the air between us had changed. Tom oblivious, as always, Corridan as if nothing was different. He talked about work, griped about traffic, and spent his evenings watching reruns of old detective shows with the volume just a little too loud. I tried to match his energy, to settle back into the rhythm. We'd spent hours building, but my mind kept drifting to Jack's voice, to the way he looked at me with expectation, to the version of myself I had rediscovered in his presence. It was late on a Tuesday when the silence Fenolicricti had gone to bed early. Again, had been tired lately, or maybe just uninterested. I stayed downstairs, curled up in the armchair with a book. I wasn't really writing. I heard Jake in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, the gentle clink of dishes and running water, the only sound in the house. I don't know what made me stand up and walk in there. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the part of method missed being seen. He was rinsing the last plate when he spoke. You'll be moving out soon, Henneted, slowly drying his hands on a towel. A few more days. I leaned against the counter, my heart fting. It's been nice having ya here. His eyes met mine. It's been more than that. The words hung in the air, like steam from the sink. Warm, heavy, impossible to ignore. I took a breath, unsure of what I was about to say until it came out. I didn't know what to do with all of this. Jake stepped to a little closer, not now to touch, but enough that I could feel his presence. You don't have to do anything, Rachel. I meant what I said. I'm not here to make trouble, but I also won't pretend that this, whatever this isn't, meant something to me. I swallowed, my throat dry. It meant something to me too. We stood in silence, the soft hum off refrigerator, the only sound web between us, and then he did something and exited again. Hesmeld, not a flirtatious smile, not as mug or self-assured one, just a warm kind smile that said, it's okay, I see you, I still respect you. That night I went up to my studio, the room I had once used to paint, long forgotten until Jake encouraged me to return. I pulled out a fresh canvas. I didn't know what I was painting until I was halfway through it. It was a woman, half in shadow, half in light, standing at the edge of something vast, the ocean, maybe, or a wide open sky. Her hair was tousled by wind, her shoulders bare, her expression vulnerable, strong, uncertain. And for the first time in years, it felt like I was finally painting myself. The next morning, Jake was our digest, his bags packed. By the front door I walked downstairs, slowly taking in the sight, with a strange tightness in my chest. So this is it, I said, trying to sound lighter than I felt. He turned to me, hands in his pockets. For no, we stood there for a moment, two people on opposite ends of something undefined. He stepped forward and racked his arms around me in a hug that said everything words couldn't. It was warm, safe, deeply personal, but it didn't ask for more. I hope you keep painting, he said softly, his breath near my ear. And I hope you keep choosing yourself once in a while. I nodded, unable to speak. Then he was gone. That evening Tom came came home from work and noticed the painting sitting on easel. He stared at it for a long time. "Is this new?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. He looked at the woman in the painting, the wind, the light, the quiet strength, and then looked back at me. "You should do more of these, is really good." I smiled, thanks. It wasn't a grand revelation. He didn't suddenly see me the way Jake had, but maybe, just maybe, he'd started to notice, and for now that was enough. 3 weeks had passed since Jake left. The house had returned to its usual rhythm, steady, predictable, a little too quiet, and I moved through our days like we always had. Coffee in the mornings, groceries on Saturdays, Sunday dinners with the kids when they were free from the outside. Nothing had changed, but inside me, everything had. Jake's absence wasn't a hole. It was a spark, a reminder, not of something he had done, but of something he'd awakened. He hadn't tried to take anything from me. He had not said bundius. If anything, he'd held up a mirror and gently asked me to look. And I had. I started painting Gagin regularly this time. Tom would sometimes poke his head into the studio while I worked, ask about the colors or the subject. He didn't always understand what I was creating, but he showed interest. A quiet, respectful kind. One night, while we were doing dishes, he reached for my hand unexpectedly and said, "You seem different lately, happier." Mary didn't know how to respond. "At first I think I'm just remembering who I am," I said. He looked at me for a long time. "I'd like to know that woman better. It wasn't poetry, but it was amazing." We took a weekend trip not long after, just the two of us. We stayed at a little bed and breakfast near the coast, where the wind was salty and the waves spoke a language older than Memon morning. While Tom was still sleeping, he walked alone to the edge of a cliff that overlooked the sea. I stood there for a long while, the wind tooing at me sweeter, the sun soft on my face. I thought of Jake, not with longing but with gratitude. He had come into my life at Otimi when I didn't even realize how lost he was. And without asking for anything in return, he'd left me with something precious, to feel, to remember, to want more. On the last night of our trip, Tom and I sat by the fireplace, sharing a bottle of wine we'd picked up from Alicau Vineyard. He reached over, touched me wrist gently, and said, "I'm sorry. I stopped seeing you." Ratch tears welled up before I could stop them. I stopped showing up too, I whispered, and in that moment, I realized that what Jake had given me wasn't an escape. It wasn't about romance or thrill. It was a doorway back to memorage, back to myself. We didn't talk about Jake after that. There was none. What mattered was that I had changed, and that change, in its quiet way, had changed everything. I still think of him sometimes when the wind is strong, or when I finish a painting and step back to look at it in the light. Not with regret, but with respect. Because some people enter your life not to stay, but to wake you up. And once you're awake, the world never looks quite the same again.